Hello, everybody. This is Renault, and I haven't done an upload in a very long time. That's because I'm not actually able to do uploads on my new computer. And, well, not unless I don't want my voice coming through, and whatever. The important thing is, when I saw this news, I immediately had to get away from my new computer, boot up my old laptop, and post about this. The big headline: DC's Dan Didio out as co-publisher. And this is from the Hollywood Reporter, but pretty much everyone is reporting on this, and I wanted to put my 2 cents in. Now, for those who don't know, Dan Didio is a longtime person at DC Comics, as he was the co-publisher along with Jim Lee. And previously, he was also a VP executive editor and even vice president of editorial. So he's been around DC for a very long time. And he was instrumental in Eddie Berganza harassing and sexually abusing and assaulting women at DC. And somehow that was all covered up. In fact, one of the women who reported it eventually got fired, while the Eddie Berganza himself was eventually promoted. So that's kind of how I know Dan Didio, as a guy who quietly and happily turned a blind eye to sexual abuse and assault at DC. So recently, it sounds like he's been released and let go from Dan Didio. Let's go into more about what this means as we go through this article. So DC, had Didio as the publisher, and he was one of the main people behind the DC's 2011 line-wide relaunch of the New 52. Now, when it comes to the New 52, it was initially successful, but then it was terrible and it tanked, and people just didn't want to deal with it. Now, I don't know the New 52 directly. I know the New 52 because of the effect it ultimately had on the DC animated films. I noticed that all of a sudden Damian Wade became a Mary Sue in all the films, and he was the best at everything ever. And I learned that that's because the DC universe had to connect to the two. And ever since then, I've hated Dan, without even knowing all the stuff about him being complicit in women being sexually assaulted at DC Comics. I just know him from being primarily responsible for this utterly contemptible presentation of Damian Wayne, and I've never liked Damian ever since. Now, going back to the article, Didio's departure comes ahead of an announced further relaunch of DC Comic Book Universe that would restore even more elements that were initially removed from the ultimate failure of the New 52 line. So, again, this is because there was fallout from the New 52 changes, and then they tried to reboot it, and they didn't reboot everything, and so it has to get further rebooted. So this is just Didio having cascading failure. And when I say cascading failure, what I mean is he failed, and then they tried to fix it. But his failure was so spectacular and great that it requires further and more revisions, and that's why we're getting yet another reboot, because the stink of the Didio era wasn't quite washed away, so to speak. Now, going back to the article, while the project that has not been officially announced, certain stories that reportedly tie in have been including DC's free comic book day release, Generation Zero Gods Among Us. It's unclear at this point if plans for this relaunch will be delayed or cancelled in the wake of this news. Throughout his tenure at DC, Didio has worked as a writer on multiple properties, blah blah blah. There's going to be more to come. So this is big news. Dan Didio is an incompetent prick, but then it seems like all the executives at DC are various levels of incompetence. What I'm surprising is that they're under the Warner Brothers umbrella, and arguably Warner Brothers is one of the worst entertainment companies on the planet that doesn't directly involve video games. And so like I mentioned before, uh, DC, their animation is they cancel series even when it's high performing. They change characters. They're inconsistent in their characterization. That's my initial exposure, of course, was through the DCAU, through the Batman the Animated Series, which eventually had Superman, and then the Justice League, and then the Justice League, etc. That's how I initially became familiar with DC. So this is huge news. Didio is terrible. I am so happy he's terminated. He's the guy who was, at least in part, responsible for Brian Michael Bendis being harpooned over to DC. And if those of you might remember the DC advertisements, it was all about Bendis is coming. And their all new heroes were just thrown by the wayside while they were marketing that Bendis is coming. Now, I don't know what DC saw in Brian Michael Bendis. I don't know what Dan Didio saw in Brian Michael Bendis. But Brian Michael Bendis was nothing to write home about. And it seems like they've given roughly a quarter of all of the comic books to Brian Michael Bendis. And Brian Michael Bendis is a terrible writer. I mean, I'm sure maybe he wrote some good stuff once upon a time, but he's way past his prime. And again, that's Dan Didio. That's Dan Didio bringing in this person who's terrible, giving nearly a quarter of their entire line to Brian Michael Bendis, and he's just tanking the entire DC comic run with them. So anyway, Dan Didio is out. Warner Brothers has been rumored to be looking to chop dead wood, so to speak. And I would imagine that this is a long time coming, and that this is part of a more ongoing trend where lots of changes at DC are going to be taking place, similar to how a lot of changes have been taking place at Marvel. One last thing I do want to mention, DC has, and the comics industry as a whole, has really been faltering during this up economy, and that's because they haven't been able to streamline their movies with their comics, with games. They just haven't done it. I know why Marvel hasn't been able, but I don't know. I kind of know why DC, and that's because the movies have not been good, and so by trying to have a tie-in to the comics are not really going to be a draw. Whereas Marvel has had fantastic movie success, and Marvel did not tie in their comics to the movies because of Ike Perlmutter, who is another one of those people who needs to be gone. Anyway, that's all I have to say about this. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hit that like button and subscribe, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.